Hey everyone, in today's video, I want to share 5 quick tips for helping to build that student-teacher bond or connection. Now, one of the best parts about teaching is really building those connections and bonds with your students year to year. And while it's important to do that starting right away at the beginning of the year, we know that those first couple months can sometimes be a lot about procedures. We really want to get our students used to the classroom and school expectations that they will be facing all year long, so we can start our year nice and smoothly, right? We do all that work at the beginning to then kind of sail a little bit easier throughout the rest of the year. So I thought this video would be a timely one to kind of check in with yourself and with your students and really see how we can get to know our students a little bit better. I don't think any of these ideas are going to be brand new to you, but they will be nice little reminders to kind of check in with yourself and remind yourself of what you want from this year with your students going forward. If you're ready to hear these 5 tips, give this video a like, subscribe to my channel, and let's dive in. Tip number 1 for fostering student-teacher connections is to host a show and tell. Now, show and tell is already pretty common in K-2 classrooms, and that's a great thing, but there are 2 things I want to note about it. Number 1, if you are a teacher of older grades or students in older grades, don't skip out on the show and tell. It can be a great way for students to feel empowered and confident sharing about themselves, and it's a great way for you as the teacher to learn more about your students. And secondly, even if you already host show and tells in your classroom, try not to do it just once. You want to do a few scattered throughout the year, and you can do them with different themes. You can of course have an open-ended show and tell where they can bring in anything, as long as it fits in their backpack, and there's probably some guidelines there, but they can really try to bring in anything to share with the class, but then also try to do themed ones. For example, you might want to have students bring in something that is related to their family in any sort of way, and that can be open-ended, but again, related to their family or the people in their home, and they can come and share that with you. Around those winter holidays, I like to have students do a show and tell where they bring in something that is related to a tradition that they do at their home. This is a great time to learn about what we all do at home and how it might look similar and how it might look different. You might want to have a show and tell, but have students bring in something that is something they like to do outside of school. So maybe like an after school or a weekend type activity that they enjoy doing. All these different types of show and tell activities really let you learn a lot more about your students. And like I said, it empowers them and gives them confidence to share about themselves in a safe environment that hopefully you've nurtured and created for them. 2 other quick notes about show and tells. Number 1, they do not need to be super long. In fact, I like to keep them pretty quick. And I usually split up my students so they would each have a day. So if we do this 4 times a year, right, we would use like an entire week, and 3 to 4 students would go on this day, 3 to 4 on this day throughout the week. So we're not spending a huge chunk of time doing this. And that way, not everybody necessarily has to bring in their show and tell item on the same day. They can kind of spread it out. And number 2, which I think is really important, is as the teacher, you might want to take some notes. It can be hard to remember all of your students' interests, so if you can write down little notes about them, it's going to be especially important for tip number 2. That being said, tip number 2 for building student-teacher connections is to recommend books based on your students' interests. Now, this is just a simple but meaningful way to show your students that you're listening to them, that you understand some of the things that they enjoy, and so much so that in your own time, you thought of a book that they might enjoy. So if your students have book bins, or if they have any sort of independent reading time, or even if you just want to let your student take that book home for a couple days to read it and then return back to you, I like to put a little sticky note and just kind of leave it on their desk or leave it in their book bin with a note that says, "I thought you might enjoy this," or something along those lines. For example, if you notice that some of your students have been playing basketball a lot at recess and they just talk about basketball all the time, or maybe you know that they do basketball outside of school because you've talked to them, or maybe they shared that in one of their show and tells, you might want to find them a basketball related book that they can take home and read with their family. Or again, if you have book bins and independent reading time, you might want them to read that book during that time. Not only does it help your students feel special, but it also lets them know that you are really listening to them and that you kind of understand what they like. If you can even take this a step further, if you find that most of your class enjoys a particular activity or something, that's relevant in popular culture to them, and you can create an entire lesson around it, then you have like automatic buy-in from your students, which is great, and it goes beyond just reading those those books. So it's kind of like 2 tips in one. The first one is to recommend individual books to show that you understand individual students' likes and dislikes, but then also if there's like a big group thing that all of your students like, you might want to make some whole group lessons based off that. Tip number 3 is to give a caretaker inventory. Now, if you had an open house already, you may have done this, or sometimes people send this home at the beginning of the year. This is just a reminder that if you haven't, this is still a great time to do that. And essentially a caretaker inventory is something that you will give to the parents or guardians or caretakers of your students to fill out on their own. Now, this is going to be really helpful because generally speaking, the parents or caretakers will know more about the child than the teacher, especially at the beginning of the year. So this can be helpful to kind of understand the students' likes and dislikes outside the classroom. They can go ahead and write down some things that they know that their child enjoys doing. They can also write down some things that their child may struggle with at home. And when they struggle, what might help them. That gives the teacher a lot of insight into how you can help each of your students become successful. Not only is this important information to have, but it really helps bridge that parent-teacher connection as well, because we are all invested in their child's life and we all want them to be as successful as possible. So it really helps kind of open that line of communication. And just another friendly reminder that as the year goes on, hopefully the caretaker inventory isn't the only way you have, connected with parents, but also share successes that your students are having with their caretakers often. Usually the parents or guardians are going to say something to the student like, oh, Mrs. Jones reached out today and she said you did amazing at XYZ, and that's going to help that student feel really special and also let them know that, again, we're all in this together to help raise these successful children. All right, tip number 4 for fostering student-teacher connections is to share about yourself. Now, I'm not saying you need to be a complete open book. I know some people are more private than others in general, but it is nice to note that it's pretty intimidating for your students to get up in front of the class during a show and tell, or even just in front of you, an authority figure in their life, and just kind of share their heart with you, right? So the more you can share about yourself by offering up details about what you like to do outside of school, what are your interests? If you want to share things about your family, students love hearing that and they can really relate to you as a person. Instead of just their teacher. Not only does this help students be more open, but it also helps them make connections with you as the teacher. Most 5, 6, and 7-year-old students don't really look at their teacher and think, oh yeah, we have a lot of connection, we have a lot of in common, right? Because you may not. But like I said, it does help for them to see you as not just their teacher, but as a person with interests and feelings and activities they like to do and all sorts of stuff. And tip number 5 is one that I love, and that is to play games with your students. Now, I love to have my students play games for many different reasons: reviewing skills, learning about winning and losing and what that looks like in an appropriate manner, having arguments and overcoming arguments, many different reasons. I share about games all the time in my videos, but with this tip, I want to emphasize that you can also play games with your kids, giggle along with them, and have some fun. I shared some tips, I think it was last month or the month prior, on how to help your students collaborate with one another. The video looks like this right here, and I share some silly games called towel flip that are really just going to have your students try to work together, but they're also going to probably giggle a lot throughout the process. And not only does laughing and playing make for a fun environment, but it also releases some dopamine, it breaks down those walls, and it shows that you are part of the classroom, not that you are just up here and the rest of the classroom is all down here, like this power dynamic. And of course, they need to listen to you and they will learn that. But by socializing with your students in an appropriate way, like playing a simple collaborative game with them, it can just be a whole lot of fun. So there you have 5 of my simple tips for really fostering those student-teacher connections. I would love to know from you if any of these was a favorite that you want to try with your own class that you haven't yet, or if you have other ideas for really building great relationships with your students, please drop them down in the comments. I love to read them all, and I also love that other teachers can read these tips and ideas and we can all learn from one another. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up so I know. Make sure you are subscribed to my channel and click that bell. That way you're notified of every new video. See you in the next one. Bye.